Thorne Davidson had always been good at being invisible. Not the kind where people couldn't see him, but the type where they saw just enough to think they knew him without really knowing anything at all. He was the guy who showed up to the astronomy club meetings exactly 5 minutes early, made observations about Jupiter's moons that were insightful but not show-stopping, left before anyone could ask him personal questions. His neighbors thought he was polite but private. His colleagues at the university library where he worked thought he was efficient but unremarkable. Everyone had an opinion about Thorne, but nobody really knew Thorne. His apartment told the same story: clean, organized, and completely impersonal. Except for one corner, the balcony facing west was Thorne's sanctuary. Here stood his pride and joy, a Celestron Edge HD 14 telescope. It's far too expensive for a university librarian's salary, mounted on a custom tracking system he'd built himself. The telescope represented 5 years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and meticulous saving. Through its lens, Thorne felt connected to something larger than himself. Something that didn't require small talk or social obligations. The April evening was perfect for stargazing. Clear skies with minimal light pollution, thanks to the neighborhood's monthly energy conservation night. Thorne had been tracking a particular section of the sky for weeks, convinced he'd spotted an anomaly that the online astronomy forums had missed. He'd documented everything meticulously, preparing to submit his findings to the International Astronomical Union. He stepped inside briefly to retrieve his star charts, leaving the balcony door open to the gentle spring breeze. The 3 minutes he spent rummaging through his desk would change everything. When he returned, the telescope was gone. Thorne stood frozen, unable to process the empty space where his most prized possession had been moments before. The mounting brackets remained, looking forlorn and useless. His logbooks lay open, pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. But the telescope itself had vanished. His first thought was that he was hallucinating. Perhaps he'd been staring at stars too long. His second thought was to call the police. But before he could reach for his phone, he saw movement on the balcony next door. Cassidy Wells, his neighbor for the past 8 months, a woman who had moved in with more boxes of equipment than furniture, who kept odd hours, and who had once criticized his telescope positioning during a chance elevator encounter. "You're missing the Camellia-Pardalis meteor shower by 3 degrees if you keep it angled that way," she'd said, then disappeared behind her door before he could respond. Now she was on her balcony, her silhouette unmistakable against the night sky. And something large and cylindrical was being positioned on a tripod: his telescope. Thorne felt his carefully constructed wall of indifference crack. This wasn't like having someone borrow a cup of sugar or take his parking space. This was his window to the universe, taken without permission. He marched to his front door, then down the hallway to apartment 4B. He knocked 3 times. Each rap against the door more forceful than the last. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Ms. Wells, I can see you're on your balcony with my telescope. I'd like it returned immediately." Silence. Thorne returned to his apartment, his mind racing through options. Call the police. Confront her on the balcony? Neither approach felt right. To a man who had spent his life avoiding confrontation, as he paced his living room, his eyes fell on something he hadn't noticed before. A small container on his coffee table that definitely hadn't been there earlier. It was roughly the size of a matchbox, but made of some metallic material he didn't recognize. A note was attached. "Borrowing your scope. Emergency. Will explain. Don't open this." Despite its small size, it felt surprisingly heavy. When he tilted it slightly, something inside shifted, making a soft scraping sound against the metal. His first instinct was to respect the note's instruction not to open it. His second, stronger instinct was fueled by indignation. She had taken his most valuable possession without permission. Her mysterious box was now his collateral. Thorne carefully opened the container. Inside was what appeared to be a rock, gray, porous, with unusual crystalline formations catching the light. "A moon rock," he whispered, his astronomer's trained eye recognizing the distinctive characteristics, but that was impossible. Moon rocks were among the most secure and carefully monitored objects on Earth, Each gram was accounted for, divided between research institutions and museums worldwide. Yet here, one sat in his living room, left behind by a neighbor who had stolen. His telescope. Thorn closed the container and placed it in his desk drawer. Whatever game Cassidy Wells was playing, he was now a player too. If she wanted her impossible rock back, she would need to return his telescope and provide one hell of an explanation. He looked out his window toward her balcony, where she was now intensely focused on something in the night sky, her body language, suggesting urgency. For the first time in years, Thorn Davidson felt something besides passive contentment or mild disappointment. He felt curious. And he wasn't going to become invisible again until he had answers. The next morning found Thorn bleary-eyed and hunched over his laptop. He'd spent half the night researching moon rocks, confirmed specimens, and their locations. None of the databases mentioned any missing samples, and certainly none that would be in the possession of a woman living in apartment for B of an unremarkable apartment building in Portland. His telescope was still missing. From his window, he could see Cassidy's balcony was empty now. The space where his telescope had stood vacant, as if nothing had happened. The container, with the alleged moon rock, sat on his desk, closed but demanding attention. He'd examined the rock briefly the night before, but now, in morning light, he opened the container again for a more thorough inspection. The rock was unlike any lunar sample he'd seen in museums. It had a subtle iridescence when tilted toward the light, something not characteristic of known lunar materials. More puzzling were the tiny, perfectly geometric formations embedded within the porous surface. They almost looked like ... circuits. A knock at his door startled him. He quickly closed the container and slipped it into his pocket. Cassidy Wells stood in his doorway, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept either. 8. Her curly hair was pulled back hastily, and she wore the same clothes from yesterday. 8 my. Telescope, Thorn said before she could speak. It's safe. I need it for one more night. Her voice was calm but strained. That's not how borrowing works. You don't get to take something without permission and then decide how long you'll keep it. Cassidy glanced past him into his apartment. Where is it? Where is what? Don't play. Games, Davidson. The sample container I left. Where is it? Thorn patted his pocket. Same place my telescope will be until it's returned. Safe. Something flickered across Cassidy's face. Not anger, but fear. You don't understand what you're holding, she said, lowering her voice. It's not what you think it is. A moon rock that shouldn't exist? I figured that much out. Cassidy pressed her lips together, clearly weighing her options. I need both. The telescope and that sample. What's happening right now is bigger than your stargazing hobby, my hobby. Thorn felt heat rise in his chest. That telescope represents years of sacrifice. It's not a toy you can borrow on a whim. I wouldn't have taken it if there was any alternative, she said. There's something happening in our sky that nobody else is tracking. Nobody but me. And what exactly are you tracking? Cassidy hesitated. I can't explain here, but I need both. The telescope and the sample back by tonight. And we're at an impasse, Thorn replied. Because I need my telescope back now, and I'm not giving up my only leverage. A series of rapid beeps came from Cassidy's watch. She looked down, her expression changing from frustration to alarm. It's starting again, she muttered, then looked back at Thorn. Fine, you win. Come to my apartment tonight at 11:43 exactly. Bring the sample. I'll show you what I'm doing with your telescope. And then you can decide if you want it back immediately, or if what I'm tracking matters more. Before Thorn could respond, she turned and hurried down the hall. The rest of the day passed with excruciating slowness. Thorn called in sick to the library, something he'd never done in 7 years of employment. Spent hours researching. Cassidy Wells, but found almost nothing, a physics degree from MIT. A brief stint at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, then nothing. It was as if she had disappeared from public record 3 years ago, as evening approached. Thorn found himself repeatedly checking the container in his pocket, making sure it was still there. Once he could have sworn it felt warm to the touch, but he dismissed it as imagination. At precisely 11:40 p.m., he knocked on Cassidy's door. 3 minutes early, as was his habit. The door opened immediately. Cassidy's apartment was the mirror image of his own in layout, but that's where the similarities ended. Every surface was covered with equipment, charts, and computer monitors displaying data streams he couldn't interpret. His telescope stood in pride of place on the balcony, connected to monitoring equipment he didn't recognize. "You're early," she said, though she didn't seem surprised. "I'm always early," Thorne replied. "Now explain." Cassidy checked her watch. 2 minutes. "First, the sample." Thorne hesitated, then removed the container from his pocket but didn't hand it over. "Tell me what it is first." "It's not a moon rock," she said. "It's not from our moon, anyway." "Not from our moon," Thorne repeated slowly. "You're claiming it's extraterrestrial?" "Not claiming anything," Cassidy replied, eyes fixed on her computer screen. "I'm stating a fact. It's from Europa. Jupiter's moon? That's impossible. Sample return mission, I didn't say it, came from a NASA mission." Cassidy's fingers flew across her keyboard. 1 minute. "Look through your telescope. Coordinates are already set." Skeptical but intrigued, Thorne stepped onto the balcony. His telescope was positioned differently than he would have set it, aimed at what appeared to be an empty patch of sky. He leaned in and looked through the eyepiece. At first, he saw nothing. Unusual, just stars. Then, a brief flash of light, almost imperceptible. Then another. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A signal," Cassidy answered, joining him on the balcony. "It repeats every 83 seconds. I've been tracking it for months, but it's intensified in the past week. Tonight is peak transmission." Thorne kept his eye on the telescope. This could be anything. "A satellite. Atmospheric interference. It's targeted communication," Cassidy cut in. "And it's aimed directly at that sample you're holding." The container in Thorne's hand suddenly felt heavier, more significant, and turned to face her. "You expect me to believe that a rock from Europa is receiving signals from space?" "It's not a rock," Cassidy said quietly. "It's a receiver, or part of one." She reached for the container. After a moment's hesitation, Thorne handed it over. Cassidy opened it carefully, removing the rock-like object and placing it on a small platform connected to one of her computers. 3 years ago, I was part of a classified project analyzing unusual objects that had been collected over decades. Most were meteorites or space debris, but this ... she gestured to the sample. This was different. Its composition doesn't match anything in our geological records, and it emits patterns of radiation that fluctuate in perfect mathematical sequences. The sample began to glow faintly on the platform, pulsing in rhythm with the flashes Thorne had seen through the telescope. "It's responding," Cassidy whispered. Thorne watched, mesmerized. As data streamed across her monitor, complex equations and symbols he didn't recognize. "What does it mean?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but I believe it's a key to something bigger." Cassidy's expression was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "When I discovered the signal 2 months ago, I requested permission to continue research privately. My superiors refused. They wanted to lock everything away for national security." "So you stole it," Thorne said, understanding dawning. "I borrowed it," Cassidy corrected with a wry smile. "Like your telescope." The sample's glow intensified, casting eerie shadows. Across the balcony, computer beeped rapidly, indicating some kind of threshold had been reached. "This is it," Cassidy breathed. "The peak transmission window." The sample levitated slightly above the platform, rotating slowly. The patterns on its surface began to rearrange themselves, forming new configurations. "It's transforming," Thorne whispered, unable to tear his eyes away. "Not transforming," Cassidy said. "It's waking up." A sharp knock at the apartment door broke. The moment, Cassidy froze, her face suddenly pale. "Were you followed?" she whispered. "Of course not," Thorne replied. "Why would I be?" The knocking came again, more insistent. "Dr. Wells, this is Agent Hendricks. We know you have the Europa sample. Open the door immediately." Cassidy grabbed the sample from the platform and thrust it back into Thorne's hands, along with a small device that looked like a USB drive. "Take these and go through the fire escape. Now, but my telescope." "Forget the telescope," Cassidy hissed. "If they get that sample, everything changes. For everyone. She pushed him toward the window. Trust me, Thorn. Please. The door began to rattle against its frame. In that moment, Thorn Davidson, the man who had spent his life avoiding complications and connections, made a decision that would change everything. He climbed through the window, onto the fire escape, the sample secure in his pocket and Cassidy's desperate plea echoing in his ears. Behind him, he heard the door give way and stern voices fill the apartment. As he descended into the darkness, he realized that invisibility was now his greatest asset. Thorn's apartment was no longer safe. With nowhere else to go, he found himself at the university library where he worked, using his key to slip in through the staff entrance. The astronomy section in the basement was rarely visited, making it the perfect hiding place until he could figure out what to do next. The sample container felt unnaturally warm in his pocket, like it was responding to his elevated heartbeat. Once settled in the darkened corner between ancient astronomy and astrophysics, he plugged Cassidy's USB drive into his laptop. A single encrypted file appeared. After several failed attempts, Thorn realized the password might be astronomical. He tried various celestial coordinates before entering the exact position where he'd seen the flashes of light through his telescope. The file opened, revealing hundreds of documents, images, and video clips. Cassidy had been preparing for this. Contingency, a digital insurance policy if she was discovered. Thorn spent hours reading, his understanding of reality shifting with each new revelation. The sample wasn't just from Europa. It had been found inside a larger object that had crash-landed in Antarctica in 1997. The official record listed it as a meteorite. But Cassidy's files showed it was artificial in origin, with technological components beyond current human capabilities. Most disturbing were the communications transcripts of signals received by research teams, all originating from Jupiter's vicinity. They weren't random. They contained mathematical sequences that, when decoded, formed clear questions about Earth and humanity. Someone or something was asking about us, and the sample was their listening device. Dawn was breaking when Thorn's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Museum of Science. Planetarium. 10 a.m. Come alone.
Ow.
See, Thorn arrived early as usual, buying a ticket and blending in. With a school group touring the exhibits, at precisely 10 a.m. he entered the planetarium, which was empty except for a figure sitting in the back row. Not Cassidy, but a man in his 60s with silver hair and tired eyes. Mr. Davidson, the man, said quietly, "I'm Dr. Franklin. Cassidy asked me to meet you." Where is she? Being questioned. They haven't charged her yet, but it's just a matter of time. Franklin sighed. She knew the risks when she took the sample. What exactly is happening here? Thorn demanded. These signals, the sample, humanity's first confirmed contact. With a non-terrestrial intelligence, Franklin said simply. Though contact isn't quite the right word, they've been observing us, studying us through that sample and others like it, scattered across Earth. We've found 7 so far. The planetarium dome above them suddenly illuminated, stars appearing across the artificial sky, not as scheduled. Show Franklin had activated it somehow. Cassidy was part of a team analyzing the communications, he continued. She believed the entities were trying to establish peaceful contact. Others in our organization interpreted the signals as threat, assessment, the precursor to invasion. And what do you believe? Thorn asked. I believe we're making decisions based on incomplete information, Franklin replied, which is why Cassidy's work was so important. She developed an algorithm to decode more complex patterns in the transmissions. Patterns that might reveal true intent? The stars above shifted, forming new constellations. The sample you're carrying contains the complete algorithm, Franklin explained. Without it, we're blind to half the message. Cassidy believes there's a response protocol hidden in those patterns, a way to communicate back. Thorn reached into his pocket, feeling the container's warmth. Why me? Why did she involve me in this? Franklin's expression softened. Because you see things others miss. She's been watching you for months, tracking the anomaly you discovered in the Canis Major constellation. The same anomaly our most advanced systems failed to detect. The star map above zoomed in on the exact region Thorn had been documenting. revealing a subtle disturbance in the light patterns, the same phenomenon he'd been tracking before his telescope was borrowed. Franklin said with something like reverence. The place where they enter our solar system. The planetarium stars dimmed as Franklin handed Thorne a small device resembling a key fob. This will get you into our facility in the mountains. Cassidy left instructions for you there. How to use the algorithm, how to interpret the full message. And then what? Thorne asked. Then you decide, Franklin said simply. Whether to respond to them, whether to tell the world. The sample doesn't just receive information, it can transmit, if properly configured. Thorne felt the weight of the decision. His whole life had been structured around avoiding exactly this kind of responsibility. Why would she trust me with this? Because you have no agenda, Franklin replied. No career to protect, no ideology to defend. You just want to understand the stars. As they left the planetarium, Franklin paused. Whatever you decide, do it quickly. There are those who would destroy the sample rather than risk communication with something they don't understand. The mountain facility was smaller than Thorne expected, a repurposed research station nestled among pines, accessible only by a narrow road that wound through dense forest. Franklin's key fob opened a hidden entrance built into what appeared to be a storage shed. Inside, sophisticated equipment lined the walls of a single room. At the center stood a device that reminded Thorne of his telescope mount, but designed to hold something much smaller. A note waited on the control panel, written in Cassidy's precise handwriting. See what I've seen, then decide. See following. Her detailed instructions, Thorne placed the sample in the mount and initiated the sequence she had programmed. The rock-like object began to glow as it had in Cassidy's apartment, but with greater intensity, projecting light patterns across the ceiling. At first they seemed random, but as the algorithm processed the data, structure emerged, not just mathematical sequences, but images, stellar maps, atomic structures, and finally, representations of living things. The message wasn't a threat, assessment, or invasion plan. It was an introduction, a record of a civilization that had evolved in the oceans beneath Europa's ice. A civilization that had been watching Earth for centuries, trying to determine if humans were ready for contact. The final sequence showed two distinct stellar systems connected by a line, an invitation. As dawn broke over the mountains, Thorne made his decision. Using Cassidy's instructions, he reconfigured the mount to transmit rather than receive. The sample pulsed with new energy, sending humanity's first conscious response into the cosmos. 3 days later, Cassidy was released without explanation. The charges against her mysteriously dropped. She found Thorne waiting outside the federal building, his telescope now returned to his balcony, but rarely used. He had found something far more interesting to observe, they answered. He told her simply. Together, they established a new research station, this one open to selected scientists from around the world. The Europa sample remained at its heart, now continuously exchanging information with its creators millions of miles away. Thorne Davidson was no longer invisible. He had become the reluctant bridge between two worlds, his name known to a select few who understood the magnitude of what was happening. But he found to his surprise that he didn't mind this new visibility, not when it came with purpose. As for Cassidy Wells, she never apologized for borrowing his telescope. But one evening, as they monitored new transmissions from Europa, she handed him a small package. Inside was a meteorite fragment undeniably from Earth's moon. Fair trade, she said with a smile. In the grand scheme of things, Thorne placed it beside the monitoring equipment. A reminder of how something small and seemingly insignificant could change everything. Beyond the facility's windows, the stars continued their ancient patterns, but now they held new meaning. Not just distant lights, but potential connections, bridges to worlds they were only beginning to understand.